Okay, so some people liked my breakdown of talking about Gorbad Ironclaw and why he was good unit design. So I think we'll do a little bit more of that. I have found 5 characters desperately in need of a rework. Now, before I get into this, I need to clarify what a rework is. We'll take Queek, for example, because I already did him, so he's not going to be on this list, but he is in need of a rework. Queek, he does not work as he currently is towards what his goal is. Queek is supposed to be a general of the Skaven who is a very solid duelist against infantry-sized characters. He is only a decent duelist against infantry-sized characters. Decent because unless you stand there and AFK fight him, he is worthless. You can just run away from him. There's not a lot he can do about it. For example, there are bad lords that won't be on this list because they need buffs. They don't need a rework. They just need to be better at doing what they are tasked to do. I just had an example for this. Crap. Who is it? Is it on Nurgle? No, it wasn't on Nurgle. I literally just saw someone for this. Oh, Vampire Coast. Got it. Aranessa Saltspite. She sucks, but as a mortal lord on an undead roster is kind of like her whole thing. She's kind of supposed to be supportive. She's kind of supposed to be a duelist, but isn't good at either. I don't think she needs a switch of her identity. I think she just needs buffs to be good at it. Like, Spearfisher's Net needs a longer cast range. She needs a larger HP pool so she can actually be a duelist without a healing but survive more than 1 or 2 attacks. Kraken's Bane needs a larger effect area and a larger effect, but like, I would keep her identity the same. I would just buff up the things she's trying to do. These 5 characters I think need an entire rethinking of how they work. Let's get started. First up is one of the daughters of Bretonnia. It is Repanse de Lyonesse. Repanse, what the shit are you supposed to do? So she has an explosion that is non-armor piercing, which, okay, so it doesn't clear infantry that well, but it also debuffs them for melee infantry? Or is that a duelist thing? It lowers accuracy, which is a nonsense stat no one cares about. Okay, we have the Sword of Lyonesse, which buffs up your damage by a lot, but you're a bad duelist because your best mount is a freaking horse with less than 5,000 HP. Your Fleur-de-Lis banner increases your allies' melee attack and melee defense, and then you can get 15% damage resistance for yourself with the Blessed Lady. But like, what are we trying to do with her? If she's a duelist, she needs a way better HP pool, and she needs better than a horse mount. Horse mounts are terrible at dueling because you can't fly, obviously, but also you don't have the mass on a horse mount to even push to what you want. Like, if you want to be a ground-based duelist, you need insane mass to push through things and get to the fight you want to be. In infantry and cavalry stop Repanse from getting where she wants to be, so she can't pick her fights. She's not good at crowd clearing. Like, she's kind of getting these duelist stats, but she can't find a duel. But then she also has buffs and debuffs for mostly infantry, if I'm reading this right. I mean, Bretonnia is going to be doing a lot of charging. So is she supposed to run around with cavalry squads? But again, like I said, she can't get anywhere with cavalry squads. She's going to get stuck a lot. So I don't know. I think the rework they need to go is just fully make her like a leader of men. Like, cut the Sword of Lyonesse entirely or change what the ability does, but just like don't give her any self-combat buffs. She's not going to be an impressive combatant. That's not really her deal. Screw that entirely. I would give her maybe some army-wide small buffs on like a banner or something, and if she is in melee combat, she gives things, or like honestly rip off Imric's Dragonhorn and just give her a 3-time use plus melee attack plus leadership or causes fear or whatever to her entire army. Have her give buffs. You did this rework where now there's peasants. Why don't you have her give like some insane buffs to peasant units nearby or something? Like, you know, a peasant's duty plus a leadership if friendly knights are in range or whatever. Just like give her something like, you know, I'm making this up. You'd have to balance around it, but like plus 25 melee attack for peasant units in range and have it like 55 meter aura, right? That would affect 1 or 2 peasant units at most. And remember what peasant units are before you get mad at me for that. Like, battle pilgrims are your best peasants. Oh, foot squires are peasants. That's probably a mistake, but whatever. Like, yeah, fucking foot squires getting 25 melee attack. Whoop-de-doo. But it could give her some job as, like, a frontline general type unit. If you want her to support cavalry, she needs a lot more AoE buffs for her cav and melee that don't require her to get to the front. Like, again, cutting the Sword of Lyonesse and the Halo of Maidenly Wrath and making her more supportive. Now, the Halo could already be kind of supportive, but its cooldown is 2 minutes long for a duration of 10-second blind. That's not a good ratio of uptime. So to me, if you have such a minimum duration of blinded, 10 seconds, that tells me that this is more about the damage and the explosion than it is about the debuff, which I think is wrong if you want her to be a support lord. So I would give her some kind of special thing to interact with peasants, and then I would give her more generic stat buffs for her friends and stat debuffs for her enemies. Maybe give the Sword of Lyonesse this blinded thing instead of the Halo of Maidenly Wrath, and the Halo of Maidenly Wrath could be like a generic AoE melee buff for anything, and the Fleur-de-Lis banner is a if nearby thing is peasant, buff them this way. But I think she needs to lean way harder into being a general. And honestly, you could even steal Gorbad's ability, the Orcs Are the Best, the plus like 50, why am I having trouble finding him, the plus 50% damage flat out. You could do something like that, like give Repanse like a crazy high stat buff for whoever she chooses. Give him, like, since it's Bretonnia, give him some pretty insane charge bonus and, I don't know, mass maybe, probably just base weapon damage. Because her thing is also she should be buffing base weapon damage to buff the lower knights, the Knights of the Realm and the Knights Errant. She shouldn't really have too much to do with the Grail Knights. So I do think that she should be something that supports the lower tiers of the Bretonian units, and I think that could make her an interesting and useful character. All right, enough rambling about Repanse. The second person we're going to talk about is Kroq-Gar. Now, Kroq-Gar is dangerously close to falling under the category of he needs to just get buffs, because he's already meant to be a duelist. But why he made it onto this list for me is I think he just sucks at being a duelist. Like, I don't think any of his abilities are any good at being a duelist. Most other strong duelists in this game have magic damage, so if he gets in a fight with another duelist, they're probably going to bypass the entire sacred spawning of Zwaddle. The vigor per second isn't very good. Like, it's not enough to truly get him back up to, like, fresh. And especially when a lot of people have perfect vigor nowadays. Well, not a lot, but a good amount of things get perfect vigor. I don't know. Deadly Onslaught is also just a trash ability. I think Deadly Onslaught is quite terrible. It only works if you're on the charge, because that 60% charge bonus is most of what you're taking his ability for. And I think, is it 200 gold? That's 150, but still. 25% damage increase is just nothing. Swiftness of Itzel, a small explosion with 25% more speed. Okay, this guy's probably going to be on a T-Rex, so he's not getting stuck in anything anyway. And if he's on his Horned One or Cold One, they have the same problems I just talked about with Repanse, where they're horse-type things. So you have a duelist that can't get to what he's doing. So if you want Kroq-Gar, he's probably honestly going to have to be on Grimlock, and then Swiftness of Itzel sucks. Because a little bit more speed's not going to help him. 75 speed plus 25%. He's still not going to catch anything he couldn't catch before. And Hand of the Gods got some buffs with the recent changes to how magic missiles work. I still think it kind of isn't great. I wouldn't say it sucks. I just don't think it's great. I think Hand of the Gods is the thing you could leave the same, but I would change the rest of his kit quite a bit here. So Kroq-Gar doesn't need AoE buffs. I think you could keep him as just a raw duelist, where with Grimlock he can do some decent damage. I think Carnosaurs in general need another pass, because Carnosaurs in general are pretty underwhelming, and since he's riding one, it's also underwhelming. So I think he needs more base weapon strength. I think T-Rexes should be a little scarier than they are. Other than that, he could use a roar of some kind, and I know that's kind of stealing Nakai's thing or whatever, but I mean, if Grimlock roars, people should be spooked. If you really wanted to keep the explosion, I would take the Swiftness of Itzel and way pump up its explosive power. Not damage, but just explosive power. So like when he pops it or something, or Grimlock turns and like sweeps its tail or whatever, like just have this explosion be huge and push back, infantry all over the dang place, and maybe even push back cavalry a bit and let him get out of tricky situations. So that just needs to be pumped way up if it's going to be a thing. I also think that he needs to lose Deadly Onslaught. He's just not going to get enough charges off to really make that kind of thing worth it. Sacred Spawning of Zwaddle is also not great. As much as this game has heal bloat, I think Kroq-Gar probably needs some form of healing. So Sacred Spawning of Zwaddle, you might want to change to... Maybe you could steal Golgfag's thing. So if he's out of combat, you could pop it to get a little bit of healing, but he has to stay out of combat for it to work. And then maybe it recharges only when he's in melee, so he can stop and take these breathers or something. But if you take him as your main character, you can get healing from an extremely expensive Skink Oracle that bring only Earthblood, or a Rev Crystal that takes a long time to heal Kroq-Gar up. So Kroq-Gar can't get any healing support, which makes it very difficult to bother taking him. So, yeah. I would increase the explosion width of Swiftness of Itzel, give him some sort of out-of-combat recharge to give him vigor and healing, but only if he's out of combat, and then stipulate that its cooldown has to come down when he's in melee, so at least make him fight. And then I would cut Deadly Onslaught and get something a little more intense, like a new ability called, like, you know, Old Blood, Heated Old Blood or something, and it's like a 50% damage increase instead of 25%. And then maybe the charge bonus is 50% too, just flat 50% across the board. But Deadly Onslaught is too specific. He needs to be charged and get most of it, and he's not going to be able to pick that a lot of the time, so... This is where it starts to get controversial, because this Lord isn't bad, but I do think they need a rework. Teclis. Teclis needs a rework. Now, he is not bad. He is not bad. He's currently taken by a lot of people. A lot of people enjoy Teclis. I don't think that's wrong. I do think he needs a rework, though, to be the greatest mage of all time. And he brings 6 lores of magic, but he brings 1 spell from each, whereas someone else in the game that has been in the game for a while in this capacity does his job better. Manfred von Karstein has access to 2 full lores of magic for 12 total spells. I 100% think Teclis should have 12 spells available to him, and it can still be a mix of the lores, but I think the fact that he's limited to only 6 spells to choose from is really lame when Manfred is in the game, and Teclis is a better caster than Manfred. Manfred gets 2 whole lores. Everything in his ability section is fine. Bound Fiery Convocation's okay. Potion of Troy is fine. Like, this area I would leave alone, but I would double the amount of spells he has to pick from these lores. And then his items really need some looking at. Scroll of Hoeth is quite terrible. Oh no, I lose some Winds of Magic recharge rate. It's not Winds of Magic total, it's just I get delayed recharging them for a bit, and you increase my cooldowns by 30 seconds for 200 gold. Okay, the range is decently short, so you have to get pretty close to use it. And then the Sword of Teclis is fine. Reserves per second and Spell Mastery, it's fine. I would take it. But the main problem and why I think Teclis needs a rework is if you take him with his normal kit, you probably want him as Arcane Phoenix. And his Arcane Phoenix is insanely high price. Insanely high price. Let's say you take Flock of Doom, Regrowth, Net of Amnitoc, and then skip Kindle Flame, I guess. Skip Wildheart, I guess. You could skip Shield of Shaffrey as well. He's still 3,000 gold. He's still 3,000 gold. So you don't want to take him on his Arcane Phoenix because he's crazy expensive and not that good of a melee combatant for that. It's not worth it at all to take him on that. But then if you take him on his horse, I guess he's kind of cheap. But now you just kind of have a half-assed caster. He's not even the best caster in the game on his horse. He's pretty pathetic. So Teclis needs a rework. I think he needs more mount options. I think he needs a chariot mount option. Not that you would take it, but I don't see why he doesn't have it. So I would take a chariot mount option just to be consistent. I also think he needs an eagle mount, because in the books he rides an eagle, though he hates riding the eagles. He never rides an Arcane Phoenix, as far as I know, but I read a book where he rode the Great Eagle. It was a Gotrek and Felix novel. So maybe an eagle mount to be cheaper and still mobile in the air, but not as crazy expensive as the Arcane Phoenix. Chariot mount would be appropriate. And then I do think he needs more spells to be able to choose from so he can truly be like a hybrid caster. I was kind of thinking about it. I don't know how the coding would work exactly, but I wouldn't hate for him to get a changeling style menu where he could select lores of magic and they would increase his cost some way. Like, obviously it's not like he'd have access to every lore of magic, but he should have access to most of the basic ones, like lore of metal and whatnot. And maybe you price them differently, and you can also select multiples. Like, instead of the changelings menu, you can select one thing at a time. His, you can kind of like select, you know, I'm going to take metal and life and death, and you pay for each one you select here. and then you can make them a little cheaper by individually selecting the spells within the kit or something. But Teclis's thing is you should be paying a premium for a flexibility of spells that he just currently doesn't have. He has a decent spell kit, but that's kind of at the whims of if these specific spells are good, right? Like, if Enfeebling Foe, Flock of Doom, Regrowth, and Net suck, at the patch he's on, Teclis is going to blow. So, I don't know. I think it's fucked up that someone else in this game has 2 Lords of Magic and he doesn't. So yeah, Teclis needs to look at. But he's a solid character as he is for now. I just don't think he feels very Teclis-y. On to our newest character that needs a rework, Epidemius. I think he launched with the need of a rework. He is anti-synergistic, and that is a big problem for him. Tallyman's Blade Summon is good, but Epidemic Outburst sucks. Contagious Lethargy, minus 80 speed, minus 80 charge speed. He himself is so slow that that's not usually going to matter. A 10-second speed debuff, he's not going to make any distance. So it doesn't get him to safety. And it doesn't help anything catch up to what he's running down because he's going to be slower than whatever it is that's trying to catch up to him. So, like, I don't know. Epidemic Outburst kind of sucks. Tally of Pestilence kind of sucks because it affects demonic units. It gives them more melee attack and physical resistance. But Nurgle's demons don't have a lot of synergy with that. Their melee attack is pretty fine. Their damage is low, so just giving him more chance to hit isn't going to help that much. And nobody really challenges Nurgle's infantry in melee anyway. They just shoot them. And physical resistance, I mean, you're already going to be bringing magic damage against demons for the most part, so that's kind of a... You're wearing a hat on a hat at that point. And then also, as I just said, most people kill Nurgle at range, especially his infantry. So, that's not going to be great. Just giving him more melee attack? I don't know. Because Nurgle doesn't get through anybody quickly, and this doesn't give him more damage, just gives him more chance to hit. Which I know can lead to more damage, but I don't know. And this has to charge up. It has to charge up by nearby entity death, which usually you're the ones doing the dying in the early game. So if you lose some Nurglings, that'll charge this up really fast, but then you've charged that up really fast to buff not Nurglings. They're dead, so what are you buffing? Plague Bearers? Exalted Plague Bearers? Because that's it. Those are your demonic units. Plague Ogres aren't demonic. Chaos Warriors aren't demonic. Forsaken aren't demonic. Pesticores aren't. And if you look at the monsters, okay, you're buffing up Plague Toads, maybe? Pox Riders, maybe? Nurgle doesn't have a lot of demonic units. He doesn't have any demonic cavalry. He has Furies, I guess, but those are usually the first to die. So I don't know. Nurgle's roster doesn't have that many demons to begin with, and Epidemius is all about buffing them. Sands of Sickness is the closest thing to a good spell he has. Melee damage, reflection, and vigor. For enemy loses melee defense and speed. That one's more fine. I wouldn't change it. As for the rework, I think he's close to being what he's supposed to be. He's supposed to be like this buff, debuff lord. I'd keep the Sands of Sickness and the Tallyman's Blades, but Epidemic Outburst sucks. I would honestly just make it a violent, deadly explosion. Like, just up that armor-piercing damage, and it's a way for Epidemius to clear out infantry or cavalry surrounding him. It's a way to punish him for getting surrounded. Because he should be countered by duelists, like single-entity duelist monsters. Like, if the Slaughter Brute or Bloodthirster catches up to him, he should be in trouble. But I think cavalry or infantry surrounding him should actually get punished for their efforts. And then for his buffs, the Tally of Pestilence, I would have it increase speed and weapon strength. Because, like, as his guys are taking damage, or if they're winning the fight, either way, he's kind of supposed to be, like, writing down these poxes and railing out to his troops, like, no, work harder for Nurgle. And then, like, the Plague Bearers start to, like, instead of shambling, they start, like, running, you know, and they start hitting you with increased fervor as this guy is just ranting out about how you're failing Nurgle and stuff. Or if the enemy is dropping, he's like, good, brothers, we can win, we're doing this. So then, again, the speed and stuff ramps up. So I think speed and weapon strength would be way better than physical resistance and melee attack for his buffs. And I think the Epidemic Outburst should be more damage focused and less whatever the fuck this is supposed to be, because I think it's just terrible. Wouldn't be a Human Boy Lord video if I didn't talk about Skaven Lords. Now, I promised you I wouldn't talk about Queek, so let's talk about another asymnergistic asshole. Tretch Craventail needs a rework. He just has so much kit that doesn't make sense. I like this is not he's the hardest rework to think of because I don't fully know what they wanted him to be. So Tretch's Raiders is if allies that are nearby are winning melee combat, they get 8 melee attack and 12% more damage. If they're winning melee combat, which is not something Skaven do often, so you should be pairing him with Storm Vermin and Plague Monks, I guess? But then he has Verminous Valor to give him self-leadership and break him out of a bad situation, which can be used as an escape tool or kind of as a duelist thing to, like, get him closer to what he wants to fight. Kinda. But Tretch isn't a good duelist, and he's not fast enough to get away. So it's kind of whatever. Standard die, buff stuff around him, no complaints there, that's fine. Stay here, I'll get help. Makes him unspottable, but gives allies plus 16 leadership, but he can only ever use it if he is already out of melee. So he has to stand, and Tretch's Raiders only has an effect range of 35 meters, by the way. So he has to stand within 35 meters of combat, but not be in combat so he can use this. And if he is in combat, he can't use this, and then he has to use a different power to escape it. I don't know. And then he's Lucky Skullhelm, where he gets 40% damage resistance only if he's already losing in melee combat, which means it doesn't help him against Spirit Leech, Fireball, or Rancid Visitations. Or Final Transmutation. So Tretch just has a lot going on. So he needs to be next to melee units that are winning, but he needs to stay out of melee combat. So he needs to be in 35 meters of melee combat that his troops are winning, and then he can cast Standard Die and help them out, also within 35 meters. But if he does get attacked, he can be tanky if he is losing. It's too much. Non-armor piercing, anti-large weapon strength, really solid melee defense, but piss poor melee attack, low leadership. Tretch is just too all over the fucking place. So if they really wanted Tretch to be... Lucky Skullhelm gives speed, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. But it's only when he's in melee combat. So the speed doesn't apply if he gets out of melee combat for a bit. I don't know. That's fucked. Anyway, God, that's so bad. Okay, here's the thing. They need to just rework Tretch into being a never in combat support general type lord. You can keep Standard Die. You can keep Verminous Valor because it tries to get him to safety. You can keep Tretch's Raiders. Buff Tretch's Raiders. It needs a larger effect range, and it needs a larger effect. Melee attack should be plus 10. Weapon damage should be 25%. I wouldn't have it affect units if winning in melee combat. I would have it affect Storm Vermin, or like a specific unit type. Tier 2 units or above. So not Skaven Slaves. You could do tier 3 and above if you really just want to affect Storm Vermin. No, they're tier 2. Yeah, Storm Vermin Halberds are tier 3. But yeah, I'd have it affect just Storm Vermin or Plague Monk Sensor Bearer, so he supports his elite troops. It makes him want to be next to an elite bodyguard. Verminous Valor and Standard Die are fine. Stay here, I'll get help is just weird and terrible. He goes unspottable and gives leadership, but I don't know what that's for. So I would have stay here, I'll get help, make whatever he targeted unbreakable, and give himself a big speed buff, like 50% to 100% for a very limited time. I would do that. And then Lucky Skullhelm needs to not be a passive that occurs when he is in melee, because like I maybe didn't explain it a lot because I stumbled over my words, but giving him speed when he is in melee combat is such a weird choice, because the speed will wear off as soon as he's out of melee combat, which will put him back in melee combat where he'll get more speed. Like, what is this achieving? Nothing. So fuck that enabled if losing in melee combat. I would just have this be like Torx the Brass Bull's Brass Body. Just make it an activatable. And I would have it recharge when he is out of melee, whereas Torx's applies only recharges only if he's in melee. So Lucky Skullhelm should apply when he's out of melee. We gave Stay Here, I'll Get Help a speed buff, so fuck that speed buff. Lucky Skullhelm should give him damage resistance and spell resistance. It should be an activatable to make him unsnipeable by like Spirit Leech and Fate of the Rancid Visitations. So maybe 40% damage resistance is too high. Let's say 25% damage resistance, 50% spell resist. So when he pops it, if he's popping it to counter a spell, he gets 75% resistance to that spell. Now that sounds really intense, but we have taken this entire character for, I think that price point is fair. So if he took that full kit I just talked about, he's $14.50 to have a Lord who is specifically never going to be in melee combat, only buffs elite Skaven melee troops, and can't get spell sniped that easily. He can still get hit in melee pretty easily, because Lucky Skullhelm doesn't last that long, and we've now changed it so it doesn't recharge in melee. So your objective is to hunt Tretch down and kill him, and his objective is to never get caught and just be a cheeky little fuck. But his current thing where he can stand and fight, but not very well, is just weird, which he'd never want to do that. Tretch just wants to run away. So I think you could take him then as a Skaven Lord option. If you wanted to burn your Lord slot, which I don't think this would make him meta. I just think it would be a better identity. But you could take him if in a matchup like Nurgle, Warriors of Chaos, or Tzeentch, where you're really worried about your Lord getting sniped. You could take Tretch and then take like a caster hero and a wide army. Because in most matchups where you're not worried about your Lord getting insta-killed by like magic, you're probably still going to want Ikit Claw or the Grey Seer, or even Skrulk. So, I don't know. I think turning Tretch into like this tanky, fast Lord that just tries to stay alive so you don't take the global leadership debuff is a better use of his identity than whatever the fuck he is now. Because this shit's just ass.
Roar. Subscribe, yes.